Well, let's go ahead and get rolling, and then if people hop on, they can also introduce themselves. So, hello everybody. I'm Mandy Chong. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm from the University of Oregon. I'm gonna host, but I am not an expert in this area. That's why I was interested in this topic because I am not an expert in this. But we are talking about supporting graduate based or identity based student organizations at predominantly undergraduate. Um, Universities and institutions. And like I said, I'm not an expert. I've got some questions just to get conversation going, but definitely if there are thoughts or things that you all have, we want to get that into the conversation too. So if we could do a run around, we could do popcorn style. If people want to do popcorn style of you pick the next person to introduce themselves, or we could just hop on the randomly speak over each other until we all work it out. Introductions, whatever people feel comfortable with. But maybe if you could also just share how many clubs that you have at your organization that are specifically focused on graduate students, and then share your school and your name and all that stuff. Does that sound fair enough? So I've got about, we think about 26 out of about 450. So I think 26 that are really truly specifically grad student based clubs. So it's not very many for us at all. So that's part of the reason why this conversation really is very interesting for me. So who would like to go next? Should I just pick somebody?
I'll go. So I'm Adam. I'm the one who's been emailing you about all of these things. So I'm at the University of California, Riverside. We have 500 student orgs, and about 100 of them now are graduate student groups. So we have them split. Some are tied to the Graduate Student Association, so they're kind of academically based. They have votes. They're kind of tied to academics. And then the other half is kind of topical cultural groups, recreational groups, all for graduate students. Let's do Vanessa.
Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Vanessa Talavera and I'm coming from UC Davis, and we have around 750 groups in total, and I advise predominantly the academic groups, and I would say maybe like close to 50 of them are graduate groups. And then we also have categories that are professional schools, so like nursing, law, etc. So I'm just curious on how to better support our graduate students, especially since it is predominantly undergrad groups. So, and yeah, I will pick Jennifer.
Hi, thanks, Vanessa. I'm Jennifer Roscoe. So I cheated. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm at a graduate only institution at UC San Francisco, but I still have a lot of questions on how to work with our graduate students since I started at UC Irvine, and just that experience of their clubs there versus how they work here. So we have about 150 groups, and they're all graduate students. And then I'll pop one over to Catherine.
Thank you. I was excited to hear UCSF because I'm in Palo Alto, and I work at Palo Alto University, which is 90% grad students. So our, I think, 25 student orgs, the majority of them are mostly grad students. And also, I saw that Miami Cup in Marnie's window. Hi, I'm excited to see that. And I will popcorn to Angie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angie Keene, she, her, hers, from UC Irvine. And we have about, on average, about 600-ish campus orgs. And we have, if I were to guess, about 50 graduate focused orgs. We do have a separate registration process for our law students and our students in our business school. I'll go ahead and popcorn to Marnie.
Hey, my name's Marnie Dow. I'm the Assistant Director for Student Involvement at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. University of Miami is my alma mater. That's where that came from, but I'm not in Miami, I'm in Las Vegas. And we have about 400 student organizations at UNLV, and off the top of my head, I would guess 50 or 60 of them are graduate orgs. I will go ahead and popcorn to Preston.
Hi, everybody. My name is Preston Croto, he, him, hers. I am from Merrimack College, which is in North Andover, Massachusetts. We only have about probably 80 or so total student organizations. We have a grand total of 3 graduate student organizations now. We just got our 3rd one approved this week, so pretty excited about that. And new to advising graduate student organizations, so looking to learn as much as I can. I will ship it on over to Luke.
Hey, what's up, y'all? I'm Luke Zielinski from Warwick Community College in Maryland. We got like 20 clubs, and none that I know of are graduate clubs. All right, moving forward, I'm a popcorn to Gerard.
Hey everyone, my name is Gerard Dorvey Lewis. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm currently a program coordinator for student org advising over at the University of Florida. We typically have over 900 student orgs registered, and if I had to guess, I'd say we probably have around 50 to 75 graduate-focused student organizations. And so as a relatively new person in this program, really just looking to get more information that I can about advising student organizations that are graduate student focused.
I'm happy to introduce myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Shisholka. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Student Involvement at Elon University in North Carolina. My apologies for not having my camera on. I had to get my computer replaced unexpectedly this morning, and it looks like the camera is broken. So we're making baby steps, at least it charges. We have, like I said, 240 student organizations, but only 4 of them are graduate organizations. We actually don't call our graduate groups student organizations. We call them university programs. Our graduate students don't pay a student activity fee, so they're not afforded the same opportunities as our undergraduate student groups. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We're not supporting our graduate orgs really well, and so looking for some ideas and just best practices.
Cynthia, do you want to go?
Yes, hi everybody. Good afternoon, good morning. I'm Cynthia Rice. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland, and I work for the University of Maryland, Baltimore, which is all graduate and professional school downtown in Baltimore City. So I think I'm kind of cheating like Catherine. All of our students are graduate professional. A lot of the organizations are related to, I would say, professional organizations. In the schools. There are 7 graduate and professional schools on campus, everything from dentistry to social work. So we run the gambit of, I would say about maybe 150 different student organizations, and probably half of those are related to professional organizations that have chapters in the various schools. And so I'm really interested to see how, for the non-chapter type of student organizations that have arisen over the years, such as we have a campus-wide United Students of African Descent. They are not associated with any type of specific school on campus. They're all campus-wide. There are student representatives from all of the 7 different graduate and professional schools on campus. So in the interest of trying to help them, as well as the campus-wide Student Government Association, I'd like to really get some good ideas about how we can make those organizations and groups stronger, and I guess feel more comfortable with the roles that they have, decided to play at this predominantly white institution that's been here since the 1800s. And so now I will kick it over to Matt. Matt, are you there? Nope. Okay, what about Kristen? Oh, my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Thanks, Cynthia. Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Ernst. I'm at Rice University as the Associate Director for Student Engagement. We have about 300 registered clubs on campus, and on average, we generally have about 50 to 60 graduate clubs registered out of that 300. And has Angie gone yet? Oh, I'm not sure who hasn't gone yet that has already put in the chat that they.
I'll pop in. I'm Kate Piper, Assistant Dean for Student Activities at Illinois State. And we have about 400 orgs. I'm not sure how many are grad orgs. I supervise our student org coordinator, but I would say maybe 20. I can't imagine, based on my knowledge of our org breakdown, that we have more than a dozen to 15 to 20, something like that. But this topic really greatly interested me because before the pandemic hit, we were having conversations about our events with alcohol policy and just how vastly different undergrad student org events with alcohol are versus if you're talking a grad student organization, and trying to figure out how to have equity in that, but also understanding the very different points in life people are. And I would sit in my office and have conversations with grad students about these alcohol policies, and I'd be like, this is the weirdest conversation because you're 25 years old. And yeah, so that's the thing we're going to get back to. But yeah, happy to be here.
I think we might have gotten everybody introduced, and there's some folks who typed in the chat. Did I miss anybody really quick? I'll give a second for anybody who would like to speak and introduce themselves. All right, I think we got everybody. So thanks for the introductions. It's very interesting to hear already where we're similar or different based on our areas. So I just, like I said, have a few questions to kind of get the conversation going. And there's a couple of topics that people already had, like alcohol and how to support students of color that are also grad students at PWIs. So we've got a couple of those, but maybe we could start off with some of the nuts and bolts just to get the lay of the land for folks who are just starting to get into the grad student world. So for anybody who's been doing this for a while, do you have a different process for your grad students to register a new club? And what would be the reasoning for having a different process or structure for your grad student clubs?
Yeah, I can start. So we do have separate processes. We don't require as much from graduate student groups. Undergrad groups, we require, certain trainings and check-in meetings with us and kind of more hands-on work. Graduate student groups, we leave that open as, if they want to attend things or want to watch videos, they can. So we have less requirements. And then we also have a different timeline because we have we usually do, let me back up. We usually do our registration in spring. So we're doing it right now if they want to be active next year. But graduate student groups have a lot of one-year programs. And so someone might come in, so for example, in like a teaching credential program. And so none of the people now are going to be here next year. And so we allow them to also register into fall. So when they show up, they can say, I now want to charter this group for this year, which we don't really let undergrad groups, they need to do it now. So we have different timelines and different requirements.
Does everybody pretty much have the same process then for their undergrad groups, or just like that is your process? It's just one process for both?
I'll jump in and say we did not actually have a process that was clearly outlined anywhere for our graduate organizations. And that's one of the things that I've been struggling with is our undergraduate process is very clearly delineated by our Student Government Association. Our graduate process, we've kind of been creating one as we go because there hasn't been a lot of interest in graduate student organizations until very recently. So we came up with a process where we have a graduate student senate that has a constitution that's kind of being rewritten currently to create a process for graduate student organizations that will very similarly mirror our undergraduate population. But I think that one of the challenges we had was, there wasn't a lot of interest from our graduate programs. We have a lot of one-year graduate programs. So we've been trying to, get buy-in for student organizations early on in the process so that they can have a good year, but without having a lot of students who are here for more than 1 year. A lot of them are kind of doing a quick in, quick out type process and don't invest too much in the student organization. So that's one of the challenges that we've been facing.
I'll say for UC Davis, in terms for like our professional schools, like med, nursing, law, vet, and I think recently we just added management, the School of Management as a category. Those professional schools have an earlier registration period. So their registration period is now. And then I believe in maybe 3 weeks, we're going to start fall quarter registration for the rest of our registered student organizations. And like I said, within my academic category, there still are graduate groups, but they register with like the larger RSO community. So I think just with those professional schools, maybe because they have different deadlines, I think they're on like a semester system rather than a quarter system. It's really different. But with everyone else, we keep them with the undergrads. So I don't know if that's the most efficient way to deal with it, but that's probably why our graduate groups kind of get lost in the sauce or something. But yeah, very different.
Yeah, Vanessa, thanks. I feel like we may be the only schools that have this going on where almost all of our programs are on the term system, but our law school is on the semester system because of the bar and like all the exams and stuff. So they just took that school off, and that's a whole bunch of the grad like identity-based clubs we have. And so they're on a completely different timeline, but we have not moved them off of our regular student org timeline. We just have not done that, which is a really good idea. And I should definitely, it's on the list. I wrote it down as like, oh, duh, that would totally help them like a lot. So thank you all. I've already got one thing is good here. What about recruitment? Does recruitment on your campuses look different for your student organizations? Do you support them differently or have like a separate org fair for grad students or orientation that you get in on? We kind of do sometimes when the graduate school lets us, but they don't always let us. So we try. Does anybody else got a good one?
We don't, but you got me thinking. Our fall recruitment is typically a one-day massive festival on our campus. And this past year, we did the whole virtual recruitment, like probably a lot of people switched to. In fall, we're switching to in-person, but multiple days based on org category. And I never thought to consider grad orgs as a potential category. We break them down kind of just by performance, and music and theater is one, and comm and marketing and business might be one, but that would be interesting to look at or break down if we focus one section on grad students. So that's interesting to think about.
Well, it sounds like nobody else is doing anything like that, which is totally fine. Let's talk about some of the, well, one of the questions that I was going to bring up anyways was the alcohol piece. So on our campus, if you're a student organization, it doesn't matter if you're grad or undergrad, all the rules apply equally to any of them. And student fees cannot be spent on alcohol, but some of our grad student groups are also sponsored heavily by their academic units, and they have foundation accounts, and they use that money to have really big, what they call networking, totally using the air quotes there, networking sessions with folks from off campus, and then they use all their foundation account money to pay for the alcohol. Or sometimes the off-campus folks are actually paying for all the alcohol. Like, for example, our accounting club, they get sponsored like crazy from off campus. Like all these firms want them. And so the firms are buying all the alcohol. They're bringing all the stuff in. They're paying for the whole thing because they're trying to like get all of our students to apply to their internships, and like they're smoozing them to get them into their hiring process. So it has been a never-ending point of contention amongst the undergrads who are over 21, and then the predominantly graduate-based student orgs about this alcohol thing. And academics has inserted themselves to say, well, this is just part of what we do because we want to get them jobs, and they're professionals, so they get to do this. But there's this like discrepancy thing happening with like, that's not fair. Like that is just not fair. And so the undergrads are starting to get very upset about it. And this is where we are, and have no solutions. How does everybody else treat alcohol with their grad students?
At UC San Francisco, so we're all grad, and this has always been an issue because we've tried to actually really confine it and broadly apply the alcohol policy that applies to even staff and faculty. I think I've had to have some conversations with students be like, no, you can't have an event at 10 a.m. with alcohol. This is a professional setting. We're here training you to be future healthcare providers, and this isn't appropriate. So we have really tight guidelines that apply to staff as well as students about how much alcohol can be. It has to be approved, has to be in a space it's allowed. Our student government, other funding sources, a lot of them do say alcohol is not allowed to be funded, but some groups either fundraise themselves or they have other funding sources, and they do it. And so from a risk perspective, our biggest thing, and I would like, at least I would know that most of our students, I think we only have 1 or 2 now, and then we'll have someone under 21 that are just super smart and went straight through, that we encourage them to use licensed by bartenders, because then they're in charge. If they have to card, I have to make sure like who's 21 and who's not, and then the liabilities out then. Or say like, go to a restaurant, go somewhere that has it set up instead of you serving. And then what we did have to implement on our campus is we said, okay, that's fine for you to have alcohol. It's 2 drinks per person. That's it. No hard alcohol, no kegs. But you have to have a staff member there or your advisor. So they're the responsible party in case something happens. So they really don't like it because they think we're still treating them like children by, but these are all policies I as a staff member have to follow as well.
Yeah, that's the loophole we found too, is just to send people off campus, right? Like go somewhere where they already have that mechanism set up. And if they want to do it on campus, our academic departments have spaces that are not under our control. And so they tend just to use their own internal space. Catherine, I think I cut you off.
I was just going to respond to Jennifer's comment about treating them like children. I've had some, I think, resentments from some of our grad students who, one of them, when I expressed a concern about the liability potential, which is actually how I make the argument of, I understand you would like to drink, but this is a level of liability, not only around criminal things, but all of our grad students are in training to be either doctoral level psychologists or master's level clinicians. And having a DUI on your record, I think, imperils licensure. So it was pretty easy to make that case, as well as when a student said, well, that seems kind of parental almost. In terms of avoiding harm, sure, yes.
I'll go. At UNLV, we actually have like just a campus policy for, well, campus, I'm going to say, because there are certain areas that don't have to follow the same policy, but there is a campus-wide alcohol event policy that basically any event on campus that's going to have alcohol has to go through an approval process through the VP of Student Affairs office, who very rarely approves things. And if it is a student organization, whether it be graduate or undergraduate, there has to be some sort of like compelling reason why alcohol is like necessary for the event. They've certainly like approved things in the past. Where the like asterisks come in is in Las Vegas, we obviously have a very large hospitality school that we're very well known for. And We are sponsored by Harrah's, and so there's a lot of alcohol, partnerships there. So they have their hospitality hall has their own building that has like a working kitchen and a working bar and a working space, and so they sort of have to make up their own rules in the hospitality school a little bit. So I think if it were like a hospitality related organization, I don't think they're expected to go through the same approval process that the rest of the university does. But for the ones outside of hospitality that do get approval by the VP of Student Affairs, yeah, same thing. There has to be like a responsible party, a staff member that's signing off. And one of the things is they require that the alcohol be served by Aramark, who's our food service provider, because they all have their approved alcohol cards, and they know that they have specific signage there and all of that stuff. But anything off campus is a little bit of a what we don't know, we don't get involved in. So I think a lot of our graduate student orgs just do like happy hours and stuff at local. I mean, there's so many local bars and restaurants so close to campus that we're right next to the Strip. So there's kind of not a need to like go through all that work to do something on campus when they can just do something, a block away at an off-campus bar.
Marnie, when they go off campus, is there an issue about the source of funding that will be used to pay for the alcohol? Because
yeah, that's a good question. So our funding model isn't great at UNLV. So student government so the undergrad student government will fund undergraduate student organizations, and they don't fund food or beverage at all, let alone alcohol. When it comes to the graduate school, they don't fund student organizations, only if they're gonna like travel or present research. They don't fund general operations for student organizations the same way. They might get sponsorships from departments, like an academic department might sponsor them. And if they're paying for alcohol, then the academic department is going through the process to do all that stuff. But otherwise, that's not getting funded by their student government.
For us at Illinois State, I mean, similar things as far as like, you can't fund alcohol with student fee money and that sort of thing. But the situation with the grad groups, there's also stipulations of like the number of drinks and no hard alcohol and those sorts of things. There's the number of non-drinking members that have to be per the number of people. And then there's transportation. So if a RSO is having an event with alcohol off campus and it's not in the immediate walkable surrounding area, they have to have common transportation, like a bus or a shuttle or that sort of thing. And so, I don't know, we're just kind of pursuing it. If you're talking about grad students, sometimes who are adults who, have families, have kids, have their own lives, whatever, the common transportation thing, does that make sense to make them, y'all have to come to campus and leave your cars and pay for this shuttle and this bus and whatever. And so I don't know, we're going to get back to the idea of like analyzing, are there different kinds of things that make sense? But then to hear some of you say of, your undergrad groups then kind of raise concerns if you have different stipulations. And I do, approach things from the liability perspective, which is interesting. Here at ISU, in the last handful of years, we went through a big student org classification process. And so we have sponsored and independent, and so that really ties into like the university's liability. And we've worked with our risk management and our legal counsel and what groups we own versus what groups we don't. But from a perception standpoint, the outside world thinks they're all us. And from a health and safety standpoint, we don't want anything to happen to any of our students, whether legally we're on the hook or not. So I don't know, it's just an interesting topic, and I don't know that I have answers. I have a lot of I have awkward conversations with adults in my office about alcohol. That's what I have.
So many awkward conversations. So many. I had this club once that was, gosh, what did they call it? They called it the Golfing and Networking Club. And they were all law students. And they were like, this is just part of the way you do law, is that you get jobs and you find clients because you can golf and network simultaneously. And I was like, okay, fine. Like, I can't stop you for content, right? Like, I can't. That's not a thing. And I was like, so what are you going to do after? Are you going to sit at the clubhouse together? And I'm like, of course, because drinks and golfing go hand in hand with schmoozing and networking. I was like, oh my gosh. And the whole time I just thought, all these people are so close to being able to sue the pants off me. I have to be really careful what I say, because they're all law students. And that awkward conversation, I somehow managed it. They were fine. They lasted for a whole year and a half before nobody was interested anymore. And I was like, thank God, like, bye. I'm so glad you didn't ruin it. But the awkward conversation piece is so real. I have a follow-up question. How many of you have, do you allow only grad students in clubs? Because our policy is you can't discriminate, period, which means undergrads cannot be discriminated against when they want to get into a graduate-based club. So do you have mixed clubs, or do you separate those two?
We have mixed clubs because 90% of our students are graduate students, so I have to insist to all organizations that everyone has to be open to everyone. But I did hear that there seems to be a tie between funding, or around funding, as to who can participate at what level. All of our clubs and orgs are just institutionally funded, so that doesn't come up. But I do think it's unfortunate. I participated in a grad club when I was in undergrad at Miami, and I thought that was valuable.
Yeah, we have some mixed. Usually the topical ones can allow undergrads in, but then the ones that are tied to student government for graduate students are restricted to only graduate students, because it ties into how many votes they receive, and things like that. So they do restrict. We've just never had that conversation about, is that discrimination and how are we allowed to get away with that? No one's ever asked that question.
I think that for us, that's really part of that massive liability piece, because we can't say for sure that not any of our organizations, we could say 100% everybody in it is over 21. So then automatically we have to make contingencies and plan that somebody in there probably is under 21, which means then automatically there's a higher risk of minors being involved in whatever the activity is. And if you play out our rules, any event that any student organization has to be open to the whole population. So if you're at an event that has an alcohol component and you send them off to a place that's 21 and over, then you're automatically saying you can't go. So then that becomes the discrimination factor, is that your age is being discriminated against for your access point. So then clubs will do things like have events on campus, because then supposedly we can monitor them so that underage folks aren't getting drinks, but then you're like, sure, they are not, except I can hand this cup over here, and you have to just have so many eyes on it that I don't think we can monitor it very well, which is why it ends up back with faculty leading it. It's complicated.
What about activities and events where your students are allowed to bring guests? Are there any underage guests attending your activities and events that you would want to, kind of look out for with respect to age? Because we have had that before, and we have to card and ticket every single person that attends. Yeah, it's a lot of work, really. It really is.
And graduate students also want family events, right? And so now you're worrying about, they want beer, but they also want their kids there. And so now it's really how can you manage ticketing, checking IDs, And it's just, who does that fall on to provide or pay for? Yeah.
My students are very social justice oriented and inclusion oriented. So I've had some success in helping them see how building an event around alcohol, or even making alcohol kind of a significant part of an event, can be really exclusionary to all of the many people who don't drink for very legitimate reasons, be they religious, personal, health, etc. And as well as, like, you don't want to put anybody on the spot to feel like they need to disclose that. So if we keep it alcohol free, that is a little bit more inclusive. But also, we were not going to pay for it, so I didn't have to make the argument based just on the equity piece.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder about just the general population. Like, you don't know why somebody might be uncomfortable in that situation. And that as a club, it just says, I'm not welcoming. So that's a really good thing to think about. Has anybody had success with like ticketing at alcohol events to keep it so that, yeah, if you are a person who's a grad student and you have your kids and like you're doing an event, like, have you had success doing like wristbanding or something and having that be led by the university? Or is it just in theory? It sounds like a good idea.
No, well, because our population is all graduate and older students, we tend to have events, with that population of people, not so much unless the event is open to everybody, and you can bring, like family, friends, and whatever. Most of the events are really kind of like tailored to the student population on campus. And so we don't really have a lot of students who are bringing, family, underage family and friends to those types of events. So yeah, we've been real successful in carding, ticketing. We also get a lot of help from our food service organization that we have on campus. Those individuals work, like in the cafe, the cafeteria, and the company that provides the food service is always willing to help us at events where we have food and drinks, so that everything, is maintained under control. But another issue though is when you're on an older, I guess, campus with graduate and professional students, you have to be careful with what your administration is doing with regard to holding events with alcohol. Because every year there's an event that's open to, I think it's open to everybody if you can afford the ticket. The tickets are pretty pricey, 100 and up, I think. But they do have alcohol at that event. And so you can't say, well, the administration can have alcohol, but you can't, to your student population. So you really have to be careful with the types of events that you have and how that will blend in with other events that are being held, but sponsored by other constituents that make up the university.
Yeah, thanks for that point also. The hypocrisy that happens sometimes within our institutions is really hard for us to manage later. And also, just if you haven't been paying attention, people have been also dropping a lot of good information in the chat as well. So thanks for the chat going there. So let's change topics a little bit to the other one that got brought up. So Cynthia posed a question that I think is super hard and very interesting, which is, how do you support grad students who are also at a PWI and are students of color? That's like a whole nother level, right? Like, it's a whole nother level. Anybody got thoughts or have had good experience with this, or suggestions for best ways to support this very important population on our campuses?
I could just say kind of a big wall that we often face is funding, like financial support for those organizations to do what they want to do. And graduate student groups receive really no funding from the university because they don't pay those student activities fees. And so people come in and they say, I want to start this group for a really good reason. We want to do events. And then they hit that wall of, I'm going to get no support, right? And our members don't want to have to pay out of pocket for everything. So we've created some, special workshops and trainings about fundraising just for graduate student groups, because undergraduate groups can go through all sorts of methods to get grants and funding, and like there's money everywhere. Graduate student groups don't get that, right? So they have to get sponsorships from businesses. They have to talk to college deans and trying to get money from academics maybe. So they have to be a little bit more creative, and it's a little bit more time, which graduate students don't always have that much of, right? And so maybe considering if you have a blossoming group of graduate student groups, maybe offering fundraising workshops, things that are a little bit more focused on them, just because a general fundraising workshop, 90% of those ideas wouldn't work for them. So a little bit more like, this is just for you, that marketing may help get them there. And really talking about, I'm sorry that there's no money here, but here's where there is money. And here's how you approach a business to get a sponsorship. And here's how you can find those pockets that do exist. That's been really well received on our campus.
We're in a little specific, similar place that Adam's talking about, where, like I said earlier, our graduate student organizations just don't really have funding. But we have several offices on campus that provide like small supplemental grants or just supportive sponsorships to affinity-based groups. So we have a lot of affinity-based graduate student organizations in addition to our undergraduates. And so like our student diversity and social justice office doesn't differentiate between graduate or undergraduate students. They offer a lot of sponsorships to identity-based programming. And the intersection, which is kind of basically like a student diversity and social justice with an academic lens, does that as well. And then a lot of we make sure that when they ask us about funds, that we talk to them about like, well, okay, are you related to an academic program? You want to make sure you're reaching out to your academic college. Well, just like, what are all of the other avenues to get money on campus? Kind of like Adam said, other than just this, what undergraduates have access to, which is to apply for funding from student government. And then we also, we kind of have a general rule where we encourage student orgs, if they want to fundraise more than $1,000, that they really should be working through our foundation. And so we can connect them either to their development officer in their college, or our student affairs has a development officer, and we can work with them to try to help go after some larger donations. And then the development officers on campus know some of the, the campus-wide sponsors who are looking for a specific type of thing to sponsor, and might be able to make those connections. We also have an avenue on our campus. We call it Rebel Raiser because UNLV is the Rebels. And it's basically like UNLV's version of GoFundMe that is run through the foundation. It just costs the students a lot less money. And then donors are making donations to the foundation, which is tax deductible, as opposed to an off-campus, to a student organization which doesn't have that ability. So we make sure we make that connection. The downside of that is that process can sometimes take student orgs like 3 months to get their money. It's incredibly time consuming and exhausting, and especially when a GoFundMe campaign can pay them out in like a couple weeks. So we definitely have our challenges with that, and it's frustrating. We've tried to work with our Graduate Professional Student Association and to be like, hey, undergrad student government provides all this funding. Do you want to allocate some money for funding? And they're always like, no, we're not interested in that. But we'll help students go to conference. Like, they just want to spend their money differently. They want to help support students in their research and their conference presentations. And so they're like, they don't place the same value on general student org activities. They're like, we don't have interest in giving you programming money. We'd rather use that money to send students for things that's going to help them later. They don't see this as something that's going to help them later, if that makes sense.
I'd be very tempted to push back on the idea that supporting graduate students of color at a predominantly white institution isn't going to pay off. You shouldn't have to make the argument from retention, but you could. Like, help these students feel like they belong here and they're more likely to stick around and graduate. Again, that's not where the argument should come from. I feel I'm a little icked out now, but I do think it would be effective. But I also want to say this Black students, particularly at my institution, have recognized a need for that support. And we are so small that there's not a lot of available resources in terms of time or like employee time. So they just started support groups for all the Black identified individuals in the institution, not just students. They also included faculty and staff. And they have done just incredible work. I am now working with them to put together a proposal to ask that the people leading those groups be paid, but they've been doing it on their own for a year out of recognition that that's a way that they can support one another. So now I'm trying to get the institutional piece of supporting them financially. But support doesn't always require money is kind of what I wanted to point out.
Yeah, I think sometimes people don't know what they need until the moment that they need it. And I think maybe that our role is to just have the door open all the time, but to build some level of trust before there's a crisis so that they know you're here. If you need anything, you just come and talk to me. We will figure something out. Like, even if I can't figure it out right now, we are going to keep that on and we're going to keep working on it. But building up trust when they first start to meet with you, whether that's like with orientation or like even just signing up for your activities fair or something, if you start to build the trust of like support with people, that then when they need help, that they feel okay to come to you and ask for that support. Again, even if they don't even know what that looks like in the future. Because I also feel like, if you go to grad school, like not many people have had any kind of experience like a grad program. Like it is really very different than undergrad. Like you're so much more in charge of what you have to do. Like it's intensive time wise, like programs can be structured very differently. Like it is still a really big adjustment. And I think for anybody going into it, it's a shock. Like there's a little bit of a shock that you got to get over. So while I want to just like go to people and say, hey, what do you need to help support you? I just don't think that they would know right away. But then my other thought from that is that as students are moving through their programs, and if you can capture like exit surveys of what would have helped you, if you could get anything for the future, like what were you missing? What could I do better? What could we all do better to help support you? That maybe those exit interviews would give some window into like what we should start working on that would help people in the future.
You know, that advice that like after somebody suffers a loss in their family, that rather than saying, let me know if you need anything, somebody who's overwhelmed with a loss or some kind of grief is not going to be able to come up with, well, here are 3 particular tasks that would be helpful to me. So I think a more helpful approach are giving kind of concrete offers of, could I help you plan a program? Could I help connect you with this resource, to give them a little bit of a lead from your perspective of having helped many other students through things.
Well, does anybody have another topic that they would like to cover, something that they've just really thought about? I know we had the offhanded mention of not treating people like children and how to have conversations that don't make them feel like they're being treated like children. But is there anything else that, people have just like a thought or a topic they'd like to bring up?
Yeah, I have one. A vast majority of our graduate students are on a separate campus, so that doesn't have, an office similar to ours. There's a lot of our graduate students are medical students and dental students who are on literally like the other side of town. And they have some staff members that support them, but we don't differentiate and treat our graduate students differently, but they have no interest in participating in the involvement fair because it's on the main campus. They have no interest in our workshops because they're mainly they're not focused on medical students and dental students. Like, they just have no interest in our offerings and what we can provide to them. And when we were in person, we, at least at the beginning, used to do our in-person meeting. We would go to they have a joint campus. We would go to their campus and at least present once to them in person. But now this year, when we went everything virtual, we didn't create separate trainings for them. The content was always the same in person, but I would always be like, this doesn't really apply to you. So I wouldn't go into detail, but I'd go into further detail and kind of try to make it a little more specific to them. But now, like, for us, we didn't make their virtual trainings different. So they're sitting through content that they don't care about, they're not interested in, or they kind of tune out and they just, does anyone else have that problem? How are you kind of like pulling in what's happening at other campuses? I don't know if that's unique to us or what. I'm assuming it's not, though.
Well, we don't really have other campuses that have too many clubs. We have like 2 other campuses and they have like 1 club each. So like, it's not that big of a deal for us yet. But the pulling them in for like, it doesn't matter where on campus they're registered or recognized through, because we actually have a decentralized model for that. Totally another topic. If y'all want to know about that sometime, I'm happy to share. But when the grad students come in, it's like, they're really good at checking the boxes because they already did undergrad. So they're good at like, hey, you told me to show up to this meeting, and they don't participate at all. And so this concept that like Adam shared, like, they have different requirements. I think maybe this is something that I'm going to actually bring up, because I feel like there are some things that we are teaching our undergrad students that really, they just haven't had a chance to learn yet. And that's totally fine. That's why we're here. But our grad students have probably learned those things, and they probably don't need us to chat at them. And that maybe we should be offering something that is different for them, instead of me constantly saying in our risk meeting, I'm so sorry, I know you know this, I have to tell you anyway. Like, because of the obligations, I still have to tell you about, like, you should not drive people if you don't have a valid current driver's license in the state of Oregon. Like they probably know. So I think that separation might be a good tactic, because they're there because they're checking the box, and they're not going to be disruptive, but it does seem like a waste of their time and our time. Yeah. I just had a random thought though. What if you could get the grad student programs to mentor the undergrad student programs? But then I was like, no, they don't have time for that. So then I just immediately erased my idea.
Remember, they're already mentoring their children at home. So they have a ton of other commitments that are not associated with students, I think, at the undergraduate level, although now the undergraduate population is becoming older with respect to age. So that may catch up in the long run sometime in the future. But grad students, very little extra time to really, I'm just surprised that they can participate in any organization, because all of our meetings have to be after 5 o'clock, because they're in class and in school, in clinic rotation, or, out in the field from 8:30 to 5 every day. So it's a challenge, but, we just have to adjust our time, as employees, to be there when they need us and when they can be there. So you really don't ever have like a typical work day. It's always evolving, really. So you can be there, for them when they can be there.
Well put. And on that note, I'll wrap us up. So does anybody want to have this conversation about grad student organizations again in the future? Do you want to check in a couple months and see how things are going, or figure out questions? Or do you feel like I got a good lay of the land?
Well, I'd like to do follow-up if possible.
I would also like that, please.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, so it sounds like, yeah, we'd like to meet again as a group, or maybe see if other people would like to join in with us. So I think Adam is the one in charge of all these things, so I'll leave it to him, and I'll touch base with him to see if we can figure out a time in the future that we all could get together. It's super nice meeting all of you, and thanks so much for sharing. Like, I just don't feel alone all the, like, I feel like I have other people when I go to these things. So thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. Nice to meet everybody.
Bye, everyone.